Okay.
All right, so thank you for attending Wakefield Country Day School's online seminars. This morning we welcome Nan Butler Roberts, a noted speaker, author, and musician who received her Master's of Art at the George Washington University. Some of you may have heard Mrs. Roberts deliver an incredible tribute to MLK last January at the theater in Little Washington. Mrs. Roberts has also been a panelist on some of our senior theses panels in the past and was a speaker for the WCDS Unity Club. Thank you, Ms. Roberts, for joining us to give us the story on this historic school, the Scrabble School here in Rappahannock County, Virginia. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much, Suzanne. And I'm just excited to be in the room. I told some of my friends, please be in the Zoom room. So I am pleased to see you all this morning, and good morning to all of you. I thank you so much for the invitation and just the opportunity. I'm always happy to share the Scrabble School story. Before we begin this morning about Scrabble School, today is a historic day, and I would be remiss if I didn't say something in reference to what is going on in our country today. Not only a pandemic, but in the midst of a pandemic, we are also in the middle of a racial crisis. And today, Mr. George Floyd, we now know his name. It's known around the world. His final services are being held today. And if we all could just take one moment for a moment of silence in his memory and all of those who have gone the way of George Floyd somehow in an unjust system. Thank you so much. Well, as I mentioned, Scrabble School is near and dear to me, not only because I live in Rappahannock, lived in Rappahannock and born and raised there, but also because I went to Scrabble School. And so I consider myself an alumni. Scrabble, of course, is located in Rappahannock County, and there were more Rosenwald schools in Rappahannock. Sometimes we show this to give the information in reference to exactly where we are located. Our mission is to preserve Scrabble School and share its legacy through educational programs exactly like we are doing today. Now, there's some information that is not on the PowerPoint presentation, but I can provide it later. But I thought it would be helpful to have some of these dates as a point of reference. It is a lot of dates, and but we'll, as I said, we'll provide it later. In 1830, the Virginia General Assembly forbids the teaching of African Americans, slave or free, to read or write. In 1870, the Virginia law declares that white and colored persons shall not be taught in the same classroom, but in separate schools. In 1871, Virginia schools employ one Negro teacher for every 232 school-aged African-American children. 1876, the Scrabble School founder, his name was Isaiah Wallace, is born to former slaves Charles and Annie Wallace. In 1866, African-American landowners, Wood and Albert Grant, they purchased 90 acres in Woodville, the future site of Scrabble School. In 1896, the U.S. Supreme Court endorses the doctrine of separate but equal in Plessy versus Ferguson. And in 1900, Rappahannock County enrolls 636 African American students. So that's just a little background of coming up in reference to the time of Scrabble School. This is a photo of an old school in Woodville, which of course is adjacent to the Castleton area where Scrabble is located. In 1913, Booker T. Washington convinces Sears and Roebuck magnate Julius Rosenwald to fund the construction of 6 schools in Alabama. And hence the Rosenwald story begins. In 1919, Isaiah Wallace begins to raise money to build a Rosenwald school, the future Scrabble School. And in 1921, Wood Grant donates 2 acres for the Scrabble School. So this is a photo. This is from Fisk University. If you want more information about the Rosenwald schools, they have a wonderful website that provides a lot of information and a database in reference to Rosenwald schools. 1921, Scrabble is the first school that is built in Rappahannock County. Now, just to give this a little bit of context, through the years in the early 1900s, 1921 and forward, actually what was the date I gave? 1913 forward, over 5,000 Rosenwald schools were built throughout the rural South. In Virginia, there were more than 300 of the schools built. As we mentioned, Rappahannock had 4. Scrabble being the first, 1921. You see here a photo, very early photo of Amosville at the top, Flint Hill at the bottom. And then this is a more updated photo of the one at Washington, Little Washington on Piedmont Avenue. And this one is also they're all near and dear to my heart. Scrabble because I attended there, but Washington because my mother taught there for many years. And so this is in reference to where they are today. Of course, we know that Scrabble has been refurbished, and we'll talk more about that. And it has a reuse for daily purpose. The one at Flint Hill burned many years ago. It was not rebuilt or not restored. The site is still there, and we hope to have a group that can work in reference to having some signage there in reference to the one that was at Flint Hill. The one at Amosville is privately owned. The one in Washington is privately owned. The one in Washington, as you can see, it does have a signage there from the Virginia Department of Human Resources. And so the commemoration has been started there as well. So it is now on the list of National Historic Sites. So we fast forward through that time when the schools were segregated. And then I can tell really my personal story. I was caught in the middle of integration because I attended Scrabble for 4 years, 1st through 4th grade. And then in Rappahannock County, Rappahannock and Warren County, during this time, during integration, were one school system. And so the offices and that kind of thing, Rappahannock didn't have offices for the school system. They were located in Warren County. And So the moving forward in reference to integration, there was a period of adjustment in reference to where students were to attend. And so there was a couple of pivotal years. And so for 5th grade and 6th grade, parents were asked to send their students to the school that was closest to them. My parents, being the law-abiding citizens that they were, I lived in Sperryville all of my life until I went to college. I just moved from one end of the town to the other end, from the north end to the south end, and about a mile distance. And I went to Sperryville Elementary for 5th and 6th grade. By the time we got to 7th grade, there was a new Rappahannock County Elementary School located in the same location where it is now between Sperryville and Little Washington. So for 7, I was a part of the first 7th grade to go into Rappahannock County Elementary School. None of this was, so, you know, my parents didn't really have a choice in that. I didn't really have a choice in that. But 3 schools, 3 entirely different school systems, or entirely school guidelines and policies for my first 7 grades of school. So in 1968, Scrabble, along with the rest of the Rosenwalds, was closed. And this is the result of what it looked like when it was closed. It actually became the county dump. People would drive there, and there were huge bins out front where they put their trash. So so in comes Frank Warner. Now, Frank Warner actually is an alumni of Scrabble. And he attended Scrabble when he was a child, then went on to higher education, and actually worked in the communications of the White House at one time. He retired and came back to the community, and he just said, you know what? And his house that he built was just below the school, so he had to pass by it, excuse me, almost on a daily basis. And he kept thinking about this and saying, you know what, this is just not right. It's not right that this school should be forgotten. Many, many people matriculated through these walls. And so he started to talk with others, including myself, in reference to a process to save the school. And he actually appealed to the Board of Supervisors and the Board of Education in Rappahannock at the time, and asked that the school be, that he was able to found the Scrabble School Preservation Foundation to do just what we are doing today. It was a grassroots effort. It was a slow process. There were many dollars that came into the effort, and unfortunately, he passed away in 2003 before the school reopened. But certainly, his legacy is huge, huge in reference to the saving of Scrabble School, what we call a champion for this entire process. We also had support from the University of Virginia, the architecture department, Dr. Craig Barton, Scott French, also from the University of Virginia, and many, many, many others. So plans started to come together for the dream of reopening the Scrabble School. You can see here some of the continued plans And so there was a lot of discussion around the reuse and what would it be like? What would it feel like? What would be the purpose? And so many schools, as we know, Rosenwald's they have reopened, and they have different reuses. Some just as a museum. I won't say just, but many of them are museums where the individual stories are told throughout Virginia and throughout the South. There was a survey just completed last year in reference to the schools that have been restored or are still standing. Many of them were lost during, and I say lost, they either didn't survive because of they were bought out, they were torn down, so on and so forth. And so there was a survey done and of the various locations and those that have survived. Thankfully, Scrabble did survive. I didn't talk about much at the beginning in reference to the schools, in reference to how solidly built they were. And this was by design. Julius Rosenwald and Booker T. Washington put their heads together and came up with a blueprint, if you will, in reference to what these schools will look like. And most of them, when you hear two-room schools, many times you're talking about a Rosenwald. They have the same kind of look and the same kind of style. Maybe I'll just go back to this for a second and go back to this photo. I think I can get back there. Okay. So this is a typical two-room school design. You have a front entrance and a small hallway or a lobby. And then many times you have a divider and you have either 3 or 4 classes, grades that is, in one room. Basically, there were 2 teachers. One teacher was considered the principal. When I was at Scrabble, I'm happy to say that the principal was Miss C.A. Williams. You wouldn't dare call her anything but Miss Williams. She was, and so she was single her entire life. She lived to be about 90 or so years old. And she was also a member of my home church there in Rappahannock. But Miss Williams was a true disciplinarian. You did not mess with her. And I only had her for 1 year, 4th grade, because she had 4 through 7. And then in the lower grades, Mrs. B.B. Austin, her name was Beatrice B. Austin. I never knew what the second B stood for, and she went by B.B. a lot. She lived in Lynchburg, Virginia. It was typical of the teachers at that time not to live in the community. Many of them commuted. Mrs. Austin drove her car from Lynchburg, Virginia, every weekend. Most of the time she came back on Monday morning, sometime on Sunday afternoon, and she stayed with the family there in Woodville, Virginia, and lived with them during the week, and then went home on the weekend. Mrs. Austin, as I know, had 1 daughter. Her name was Ann. I just remember that. I maybe met Ann once or twice. Ann went to school in Lynchburg. I don't know who was her sitter or her keeper at that time, who she lived with. Probably Mrs. Austin's mother. I don't know that. I didn't hear that information. But I did know that she had a daughter and she was married. So she was Mrs. Austin. But Mrs. Austin was here, as I mentioned, for many years in Rappahannock school system. This is where she worked. And Why she didn't work in Lynchburg, I'm not really sure. I never had that conversation with her, but she was dedicated to Scrabble, and she and Miss Williams worked very well together. They were very different styles, very different personalities, but they worked well together. There was no doubt who the principal was, and there was no doubt what Mrs. Austin was doing in reference to the lower grades. I remember them fondly, and thank them so much for their dedication to Rappahannock schools. And I should say that both of them, after integration, worked at Rappahannock Elementary for the new school, the new combined school. Mrs. Austin was there, and Miss Williams was there for a time. Miss Williams was probably close to retirement, and she didn't stay in the system very long after that. So we move forward to a reuse for Scrabble. And so there was a lot of discussion about what would be the focus, how would we reopen? And so there was momentum gathered in reference to Scrabble School opening as the senior center in Rappahannock County. The senior center was meeting in at a couple of different locations, but did not have its own home. And so there was information provided, and there was community support, community discussions around reopening Scrabble as the senior center, as well as the archival and partially a museum in reference to Scrabble and the Scrabble story. So funding came through Community Development Program, Virginia Department of Housing and Community Development, over $2,000, and made up nearly half the $450,000 price tag to restore the school. This is a list of some of the funders, and they were numerous. And this is just a photo around 2008, right before the restoration. And those are some of the alumni standing in front. As I mentioned, there was a blueprint for the way the schools were built, and thankfully they were built very soundly. There was a lot of work that needed to be done on the interior, but the roof, the foundation, so on and so forth, were very sound. And so we had a good start fundamentally to begin the reopening process and the restoration process. This is a photo from reopening day, and the theme was "This Place Matters." And you can see there a number of alumni came back that day for the reopening. This is a photo of Stephanie there on the left, who was attending the reopening day, and Bob Lander. Bob Lander was the former president of the Scrabble School Preservation Foundation, and he, again, was our champion in reference to, he was really the driving force in reference to the reopening and overseeing the entire project with Professor Barton and others. So now we have a beautiful center that's has a dual purpose. The seniors love coming to Scrabble School. Some of them come by bus, some of them come, some of them are still able to drive, and they carpool, so on and so forth. In 2010, we opened an exhibit that tells the Scrabble School story through storyboarding and an interactive website. There were lots of actualities and interviews that were done with alumni. You can visit the website and see and hear many of the alumni who told their stories about what it was like when they attended. And we would love for anyone to come and visit us when things reopen. Right now, we're of course closed for the pandemic, but we look forward to having those who would like to come. One of our first, I think, tours was from Wakefield Country Day School. So we're excited about that, and we would love to have the students to come back. So we continue with having different outreach programs. We also have developed curriculum for the 4th grade. It is SOL compatible. It's easy to use. In fact, Wakefield has been reviewing that at this present time, right before the closing. And we've been assured that they will look at that closely and hopefully be able to use it as well. This is just a look at the front of some of the materials, what it was like to attend a segregated school. And the students get this information first before they come in reference to their tour. And when they come for a tour, they are met by some alumni who are able to give their stories, myself and others. You can see here some of the students that were there with one of the members of our board, Mr. James Alsbury. Now this is an interesting photo because on the left, you see some friends and myself that were part of what is called May Day. And May Day was a big celebration for the Rosenwald schools. There was competition, and it was mainly a fundraiser to help defray some of the costs in reference to educational opportunities for Rosenwald students. So on the left there is we would have a Queen's Court, and this particular year, Scrabble won the competition. So the person that's in the circle there to the far right is myself and my friend, Angela Dennis. And we're still friends today. As you can see there on the right, she was there for a presentation to the students. Seated, I'm gonna go back to the first photo. Seated next to Angela is her escort, who is Thomas Wigington Jr. Now he was my cousin, and I think he was probably about a year ahead of us. And seated next to him is, they used to call us the Three Musketeers, Angela, Cassandra, and Annette. And that was Cassandra that's seated on the other side of Thomas Wigington Jr. And unfortunately, Cassandra has passed away. But we, of course, remember her fondly, but we were great friends all the way through 1st grade, except for that pivotal year in reference to integration. And Cassandra's parents sent her to still Scrabble. Scrabble was still open. I didn't mention that. Scrabble was still open during that pivotal time. And her parents sent her to Scrabble. Angela and I were at Sperryville Elementary. And then we rejoined in 6th grade all the way through high school and graduated Rappahannock County High School together. Again, that's Lillian Ayler with Mr. Alsbury, both members of our executive of our board with some of the students there. 2014, we have added some more interactive exhibits that the students really love. When they come, we give them an opportunity to get up and walk around and have the whole look and feel. And they're so excited to be there because they have an opportunity to compare and contrast the school where they are now. And they want to know, did you have recess? And did you have, what about your lunch? They're interested to know about soup day. Now, soup day was special for kids at Scrabble and other Rosenwald schools because during the winter months, we did not have a cafeteria. This was bag lunched every day. And during the winter months, the mothers would get together and provide soup like on a Wednesday or Tuesday or Wednesday for all of the students in the school. So you can imagine we had hot soup, and you would bring your sandwich, whatever you wanted to for your sandwich. So it was exciting, soup day. Here's just a photo of some of the students who have come to visit us. And so we say that Scrabble is not just for kids. Of course, we know that the seniors are there 4 days a week, generally Monday through Thursday, and they have their activities and have a hot meal and hot lunch, and their various activities, music, exercise, all kinds of things that the director has for them, has prepared for them. Now we have different activities that are sponsored by Scrabble School Preservation Foundation. One of the things that we have provided are movie nights. These are free, and many times most of the time we have refreshments for sale, and we've had some wonderful films that have been shown. You can see examples of a few there. We have also had presentations for Black History Month. We try to have something every year. This one was last year. Taryn Weaver from Fauquier County does a wonderful presentation on Harriet Tubman. She really becomes Harriet Tubman. I mean, you think you're right there. And then, of course, our latest addition is the Julia E. Body Scholarship Committee or Scholarship Fund that was rolled into Scrabble School this year. So now we're overseeing that scholarship fund. It was I think a marriage made in heaven because Julia E. Body Scholarship Fund was looking for someone to partner with. Scrabble School was looking for a scholarship, a way to get in the scholarship business. And so when it was offered to us, it was just a way to come together. Julia E. Body, for those of you who don't know her name, was a Rosenwald school teacher, and she taught at Washington graded. In fact, she was the principal while my mother was the lower grade teacher, Mrs. And just a little bit of difference in the way they divided the classes. My mother taught 1st through 4 in her classroom. Mrs. Body had 5, 6, and 7. So just a little bit different in reference to the way the classes were split at Washington and Scrabble. This is just some newspaper clippings from various events that we've had, and also some traveling exhibits that were offered to us, one in reference to Brown versus Board of Education, also in reference to Civil War veterans in Rappahannock County. It was fascinating. Here I am. I won't say how old I am, but if I went to Rosenwald, you know that, about my age. But anyway, I was just fascinated to know that there were people that had names that I recognized that were Civil War veterans. It was absolutely fascinating exhibit, and I think so many people were enlightened and just pleasantly surprised that there were African American soldiers during the Civil War. And many times the display would list, would tell the story of where they busted in, where they, when they left. And the descriptions were just absolutely fascinating because all of this information was in the war records, was in the Army records, so on and so forth. And gave magnificent descriptions. And if you close your eyes, you could almost see this person and visualize them in your mind, what they look like. And it was very, very fun as well as informative. So this is our location. We're at 111 Scrabble Road in Castleton, Virginia. We would love to have you visit. Again, I can't say that enough. And I'm open to take questions if anybody would like, anyone has questions. I should say one last thing in reference to, we're excited that there is a move, and also there is legislation that is being reviewed. It may get sidelined and sidetracked with everything that's going on now, but hopefully it can come back to the forefront. But there is legislation to create a national park for Julius Rosenwald. In addition to that, uniquely in reference to the Rosenwald Park, National Park, it will have satellite sites. And Scrabble is one of a handful that's being looked at in reference to being a satellite site. So we are just overjoyed about that. There were a number of schools that were looked at, even in Virginia, and I think they have it down to about 5 or 6 locations. Stephanie may want to chime in on that. I think there are about 5 or 6 in Virginia, and we are one of those. So we're just excited, and we're thankful, and we're going to stay informed and wait for good news. So thank you so much. I appreciate being here today.
Man, that was amazing. Thank you so much. Wonderful information, and we're so grateful for the invitation to visit. We can't wait for the school to be open again so we can learn more about the history of the Scrabble school. So I'll open it up to see if anybody has any questions for you right now. Any questions? Oh, there's somebody.
Ms.
here.
Roberts, this is Hugh Hill.
Great.
Suzanne, am I? Hi. Thank you for that wonderful presentation. 2 questions. Why did Scrabble survive the closure that most of the Rosenwald schools experienced during desegregation? And then I have a follow-up to that, if I may.
Well, I think that's a fascinating question. And I can't really say. It may have been because it was somewhat remote, being there on Scrabble Road. The school at Washington, I should say the school at Washington became was privately owned. It's still privately owned, but it was 2 apartments for many, many years. And it just recently was sold. The school at Flint Hill is actually on Fodderstack Road. And mysterious fire. Nobody really knows what happened there. Amosville was bought out some years ago and is privately owned. So it's I can't really say. Stephanie, you may have some more information on that, but certainly it was a blessing, the only thing that I can say, that Scrabble did survive. And thankfully we had, as I said, a champion in Frank Warner, who was able to push forward and get the ear of our board of supervisors and also the school board in getting the preservation foundation started. So Stephanie, you have anything to add to that?
Well, I would just add that Scrabble, the land belonged to the county. And as Nan said, when the school closed as a school, the county boarded it up and decided to use that land for their county dump, as Nan told you. So the school was in some ways protected because it was boarded up. It wasn't, you know, there wasn't water pouring in. And then when Frank Warner came back to the county and decided to start petitioning, the ownership was clear, the county owned it. And that was just at the time that Lowe's Home Improvement Stores was offering grants to renovate and improve the schools. And so that was a sort of happy coming together, that grant existed and Frank Warner's energy was there at least at the beginning of that process. And so the school was preserved. I have seen some schools that are just complete wrecks. You know, the roof is gone, the water's pouring in. It's heartbreaking to see, especially in very remote areas. If they're not owned by the county, they can just deteriorate and fall apart and disappear. I wanted to add two things to what Nan said. One is that under Nan's leadership and also prior to that, Scrabble School has done a really important thing in recording and preserving the voices of people who went to these schools. I think one of the things that, especially as we try to understand more deeply our history, these voices are so significant. I think a lot of students now do not realize how recent the history of segregation is, that we can reach out and touch it. You know, Nan is right there. She's an example. She lived this. And so by doing these oral histories and preserving those voices, that is a very significant contribution to our understanding of our history. I think that's very significant. I also wanted to add a thing about Soup Day. Soup Day was a bit unique to Scrabble School. Different schools had different ways they handled that. And one of my cherished memories is I went to visit a school in East Texas called Pleasant Hill Rosenwald School in Linden, Texas. And it's a school where a bunch of women who went to the school or had connections to the school get together once a week and they make quilts. And they use the quilts as part of a presentation they make at elementary schools about the Underground Railroad and about Rosenwald schools. And they also, at their school, they had a little kitchen. And one of the women who went to the school, her mother was the cook at the school. And they gave me a tin tray with like little indentations in it. You all can probably see it in your mind. This tin tray that had been used at the school. And several years later, I was able to lend it to the Smithsonian, where it is now on display. It's not in the new African American History Museum, it's in the American History Museum, but they've got a display about philanthropy. And so that tray from a Rosenwald school in Texas is part of that display. And I've decided when my loan is up, I want to say to them, I'll donate this tray to you if you move it to the African American History Museum. Ooh, sorry about that. That's the ferry boat leaving. there is actually a display on Rosenwald schools on the second floor of the African American History Museum. And I would love to see that tray be part of that display. They've got some desks from the Hope School in South Carolina in the new African American History Museum. So.
I do want to add just one thing, and I didn't really make that connection in reference to Julius Rosenwald. Julius Rosenwald was a Jewish philanthropist, and as part of his giving back, into the community, this partnership with Booker T. Washington was formed to build these schools. Now, it was a partnership because part of the monies came through a Rosenwald fund, and then part of the monies came from the community. They were like matching grants. And that's the way most of the schools were funded. Part of the monies came through the community. Sometimes part of the monies came through white Americans as well, albeit probably less even than the African American community. But it just tells you how much education, the opportunity for an education was so strong and so important that, you know, given the economic situation in the 1920s, the early 1920s for African Americans was just about nil. But they pooled their monies, they pooled their resources in order to be able to fund these schools. And so it's just, it's an absolute match made in heaven that these two men put their heads together, an African-American man and a Jewish man at the time, to fund and provide this type of educational opportunity where it had not been possible before. So it's just an absolutely fascinating story. There's a wonderful documentary, I should say, that is available on PBS, and it's simply called Rosenwald. Wonderful. If you would like to see that, you can get it on PBS. I also have a copy for loan if anybody would like to see that. Stephanie has a wonderful book that she has written. The book is entitled
You Need a Schoolhouse.
Stephanie.
You Need a Schoolhouse.
You Need a Schoolhouse. And so she has written the book, and all of these, your book is available at Amazon, I believe. So, and through her. So if you want to contact her or contact me, you can do that as well.
Can I just add one word about the
So
funding?
any questions?
One of the things that was really fascinating to me when I was doing my research was that initially Rosenwald, of course, knew very little about the African American community. He lived in Chicago. He had no experience, but when he met Booker T. Washington, the two of them sort of hit it off. And one of the things that Washington explained to Rosenwald that he found compelling was that in rural communities across the South, African Americans were struggling to provide education. It was the thing that they longed for the most. They had been so systematically deprived of education themselves. They felt this was the way forward for their children. So people who were desperately impoverished themselves were putting together money in communities and writing to Booker T. Washington and saying, can you help us? And so when Washington explained this to Rosenwald, it was a very compelling argument. He wasn't going to be just giving schools to communities. He was going to be working with them to provide these schools, to provide something that they themselves wanted. And one of the facts that I love is that actually dollar for dollar, African American people in the communities contributed more than the Rosenwald Fund. Now, by far the largest funder was the public school systems, which also, thanks to, in a way, to the foresight and cleverness of Booker T. Washington again, he's roping in the public school systems. Public education is compulsory. throughout the South. The states had been just dividing their money really unequally so that there were virtually no schools for Blacks. But so the public school systems are putting in the largest share of money, but the African American communities themselves give more dollar for dollar than Julius Rosenwald. I think that's an astounding figure, and part of what makes these schools so significant, and what explains the extreme affection that people like Anne and Nan and communities like Scrabble have for the schools. They were theirs. They weren't something that was plunked down from outside. They grew up from within.
Exactly. Nice. Thank you.
Hi. I had a question. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes.
Sure.
I was wondering what became of your teachers from your Rosenwald when school integrated and you started going to Rappahannock County Elementary School. And I was wondering about how many students matriculated at Rappahannock schools with you. We have very few African American students now and just a generally declining population. So I just wanted to, any reflections you have about that arc as well, and just curious about what happened with the teachers. You seem to have such a love for the Rosenwald School, and so I'm just curious about that transition.
Yes. The only teacher that I believe that did not go to Rappahannock was one of the teachers from Amosville. And the name escapes me right now. But the rest of the teachers were employed with Rappahannock County at the elementary school. Of course, there was only one principal, and the principal was Mrs. Mary Quaintance, who was my principal at Sperryville Elementary. There was and I should say the designation too between the schools was, excuse me, Sperryville had the designation of elementary school, and the Rosenwald schools were called graded schools. So you had the difference in the name. So you had Flint Hill graded, Amosville graded, so on and so forth. Mrs. Body was employed. My mother was employed. My mother became, she was at Washington Elementary before going to Rappahannock Elementary. She taught many students throughout the county. And I should say as well, the African American population has dropped drastically in Rappahannock. And so therefore you do not have a lot of, even at Rappahannock County High School now, there are not a lot of African Americans attending that school because the population has dropped so. And that's, that all has to do with economics. You just take me, for example, when I graduated in 74 from Rappahannock County High School, I have to put in a shameless plug for JMU. JMU was my undergrad. And then I went to George Washington for graduate school. But I went to JMU for undergrad, and coming back, trying to find a job in Rappahannock County was next to impossible. I mean, there's really very little for you to do unless you're going to become an entrepreneur. And I wasn't thinking about it at that time. I was thinking about going into, I was a communications major, and trying to think about if I wanted to make that sacrifice to go into Washington, D.C. or even further, because at the time I was coming out of school, there were not a lot of jobs in the communications field. So, you have this whole matriculation out of the county, and many people have not returned. So you have that factor in reference to the reduction of the number of African Americans in the school system. But as far as I know, the teachers were hired at Rappahannock County Elementary, and many of them retired, went through and retired. My mother retired Mrs. Body retired from Rappahannock County Elementary, from Rappahannock County Public Schools. Mrs. Austin stayed here until retirement. The Fountain, some of you may remember Mr. and Mrs. Fountain. They were at Flint Hill, and also I think they taught at Amosville as well. And they retired from Rappahannock. So they were employed and retired, and then the Fountains moved back home. They were originally from South Carolina, I believe, and Mr. Fountain came back a few years after his retirement, and his class, his original 6th grade class, invited him back to give their graduation speech, commencement speech at Rappahannock County High School.
Wow. That's neat.
Yes. Any other questions?
Well, this has been fabulous, Nan.
Well,
Again, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Oops. Go ahead.
Nan, can you hear me? John Heddleston, can you hear John and April, or am I muted? Can you hear John and April?
Hello, Pastor and Ms. Heddleston. How are you?
Hello. Hey, I'm great. Couple observations. First of all, because I got to teach, a healthy group of African-American students in the 90s at Rappahannock. What happened is wonderful. They went on to get their educations, and they went on to work in other places. So the educational opportunities grew exponentially during the 80s and 90s for our Rappahannock kids who were African-American. And I could name any number of them, but I want to tell you a story about your sister, your little sister, who carried on your legacy, the one you mentioned with your childhood friends. Doretha and Becky and Nicole used to walk all the way through the school building and out to my outside classroom every day singing their lungs out. I could hear them coming down the hall outside the building and into my classroom every day, your little sister Doretha and Becky and Nicole. And I dubbed them Doretha Butler and the Supremes. And that was their name. Doretha and the Supremes.
That is very interesting. That's very interesting because when I mentioned Cassandra, there was one year that she and I can't remember the third person, but we were the Supremes in one of the 4-H contests, Share the Fun. So that's interesting. You would have the same name.
Yeah, I just dubbed them that. They came in early and sang to me for 4 minutes every day. Yeah.
Thank you for the memory.
Great.
Amen.
Hi, everyone. This is Marion. I wanted to ask if this presentation that you've given today, Nan, is this going to be available online somewhere for those who couldn't watch live while you were giving it with us?
Yeah, by this afternoon, this video will be posted to the Wakefield Country Day School website. So wcdsva.org.
Okay, and that's a public website?
It is.
Yes, this is Marion Jones. And Foley's right here next to me. I guess you can't see us.
Hello, Marion. How are you? How nice to have you.
We are well.
Hello to your family.
Thank you. We are happy to be here. I'm very glad that we got this message. And thank you for that information. We will look on the. We will look to the Wakefield Schools website.
So also, Nan, I wanted to make reference to the fact that you talked about. Hi, you talked about Miss Williams, Miss C.A. Williams, and
yes.
I'm always impressed when I look back at the just how extraordinarily committed and good these teachers were. They overcame tremendous, tremendous barriers to educate folks like yourself and like my dad, because he went to Scrabble school. And I have a report card in front of me from the school year 1935 to 1936. It was my dad's report card, and it is signed by C.A. Williams. Yes, indeed.
This is William Foley Jones and Marion Jones. Williams' family is from the Scrabble area there in Woodville, atop Red Oak Mountain. And I'm going to say it for the record right now. You have to get us a copy of that for our archives.
Will do. Will do. And
okay.
Not only was Miss
good
Williams.
To hear from you today.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And your legacy is sometimes left in your written word. And Ms. Williams in the 3rd grade admonished my dad that he can do better than he is doing, but he talks and plays too much here lately. So I thought you'd enjoy that.
That's wonderful. That's a wonderful memory. Thank you for sharing. Yes, Miss Williams was the ultimate disciplinarian. She would probably, they probably put her under the jail these days. She was known for rapping knuckles. She was known for, you know, some swats against the head as well. Certainly against the buttocks as well. And other stories that I can't share here.
Hi, this is Paul Larner. I just wanted to thank you for your very educational and well-presented materials this morning. I learned a great deal, and I'm sure we'll arrange for another visit by Wakefield students. In addition, I'd like, as we approach the end of this series, we have only one seminar more scheduled. I'd like to give a shout out to Suzanne Zylonis for arranging all of these seminars, and I hope the community has enjoyed them as much as I have. And if people have any thoughts about the future of the series, either topics that they would like to have covered or speakers, please feel free to write or reach out to us. So thank you again, Nan, and thanks to Suzanne for all her hard work in arranging this series.
Nice.
Be well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Suzanne.
Thank you, Nan. That was wonderful. As again, thank you for inviting all of your wonderful friends and colleagues. It's nice to have you all here with us, sort of. Even though we can't be that close, I feel very close to all of you. I do want to remind any of you who are interested, that was Mr. Paul Larner, who's chairman of our board, the board of Wakefield Country Day School, and he'll be giving our final seminar this Thursday morning at 10:45. And if you all want the link to that, you can find it on our website or Facebook, and you can reach out to me directly. But Nan Roberts, we cannot wait to see you in person and to see your beautiful school and get back in the classroom and learn more about all of this. So we're grateful to you so much. So thank you. Thank you for everybody.
Thank you so much. I appreciate everybody today.
Love you. Thank you.
Have a great week, everybody.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful.
And stay safe. Stay safe.
Bye, Nan. You did so great. Such a great job.
Thank you.
Really good.
I appreciate you. You made it easy. Thank you.
No, it's my pleasure. All right, we'll be in touch soon.
Okay.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
bye.